Judge Joe Brown's all-new barbecue sauce and seasoning. Justice in the form of flavor.
Law firms will take this as a retainer.
What? It must be a law firm where they hungry as hell. Now you gonna help me with this parole I'm dealing with?
Judge Joe Brown's all-new barbecue sauce and seasoning. Justice in the form of flavor. With one taste of our premium blends of all-natural ingredients, herbs, and spices, you'll fall in love with meat all over again. Judge Joe Brown's all-natural barbecue sauce collection is made up of 2 zesty flavors, original and spicy. There's only one way to bring order back to barbecuing. Just add Judge Joe Brown's all-natural barbecue sauce and seasoning, and you be the judge.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Speaking of people of color, because we have this office called the Office of Management and Budget, right? Our next guest is here, Devon. I'm gonna bring him up to have the conversation with this. So speaking of people of color, the Office of Management and Budget had created and came out with the new census. And they created a new box for MENA, for Middle Eastern and North African, right? And there have been different groups, grassroots groups of Black Americans pushing and lobbying and organizing to push for us to have our own separate box.
Okay, you want to know what's
no, let me finish, because I have to bring up the guests. So we was pushing to have our own box, and that did not happen. We still have African Americans. So I want to bring up Devon because he is a grassroots organizer. Hi, Devon.
Hey, how you doing, Dana? How you doing, Judge? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, but something with the audio is a
little... but I know sometimes my audio will be off with the way it is. Let me just double check. Hold on.
You're listening to a carrier wave.
So something, and it's like, I don't know what is going on with the streaming.
There are 2 things I want to ask him, so remind me. One, why, when you talk about Middle Eastern, did they put right next to each other Egyptians who are Muslim and Israelis who are Jewish, and you get all of these people counted to give them a more important count in the title, Article 1 census? And then the other thing is they talk about the Caribbean, but they don't list the Bahamas. They list all kinds of little places. And then when they list Hispanic, they list Puerto Rico as Hispanic. And I know a senator from there. He's frat brother. Let's just say his name is Jackson and he's from Alabama. But he lives there, so he would have to be qualified as Hispanic, even though he's typical Black American from Alabama for generations. But you see how they're doing this? We want to be chopped into smaller groups because we don't want association with somebody, so we get less influence. So instead of 64 million Black/African Americans, we get 32 million, which gives us less clout, less reason to pay attention to us. And everybody else gets boosted and they get put in small categories. Now,
right. So let me bring this up. So the new OMB race ethnicity categories, right? And this came out March 28th. That was last week. So this is really pertains to the census. The Office of Management and Budget has a sneak preview today of tomorrow's update, Statistical Policy Directive number 15, standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data and on race and ethnicity, right? So this was developed in 1977 to help provide consistent data on race and ethnicity throughout the federal government, and drives all kinds of data collections and all kinds of contexts, including a census, redistricting, and VRA claims. So just going down here, it says there are some big changes and new standards, but the biggest include combining Hispanic Latino heritage along with other categories in one race and ethnicity question. The previous approach purported to separate race in one question and Hispanic Latino ethnicity in another, adding Middle Eastern or North African MENA category. So this is what the new census will look like. You have American Indian and Alaska Native, Asia, Black, and African American. And then under this box, you have African American, Nigerian, Jamaican, Ethiopian, Haitian, Somali. And then you have the Hispanic, Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Salvadorian, Guatemalan. Then you have Middle Eastern or North African, Lebanese. So this is the new box for the MENA. Middle Eastern and North Africa, Iranian, Iraq, Lebanese, Syrian, Egyptian, Israeli. And then you have the Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander. And then you have white, English, Italian, German, Polish, Irish, Scottish, right? So each category is broken down into different groups. The problem is with Black people, we're in an uproar because we Black Americans are still stuck as African Americans, and we want our own separate box. Some people were saying freedmen, some were saying ADOS or FBA, or just plain Black American. I just say Black American. So
actually, it's defeating for political purposes, because if you make these distinctions, I can tell you what Congress does. My office I was with over the last 40 some years has done studies for them. Certain interests try to look at anything that diminishes the count to reduce benefits for that group. They say they're not that big. So I'm just saying this is a practical thing. We are seeking this X space we were on, or I was on yesterday. They were really upset about not having this, but the practical effect that I've seen in political circles is that diminishes your clout. Everybody has spent a lot of time trying to increase the group you're with. And I call this to your attention: Middle Eastern or North African. You will note in there, one of the categories is Egyptian. That's Muslim. The other category is Israeli, which is Jewish. So if there's a group that's battling with each other, you've got Iranians categorized in the same group as Israelis, Iraqis categorized in the same group as Israelis, along with Syrians. So that expands the clout and the benefit on the census for a generic Middle Eastern or North African, even though some of the groups that are associated may be killing each other. That suits their purpose by getting more clout. Meanwhile, we are up here, Black or African Americans, and it says provide the details below: African American, Nigerian, Jamaican, Ethiopian, Haitian, Somali. And then it says enter, for example, Trinidadian, Tobagoans, Ghanaian, Congolese, and they didn't even put in Bahamians. So, it's like they are diminishing us. I have a friend, his name, let's just say, is Jackson. Like I said, he's from Alabama. He's a senator for Puerto Rico. And he used to invite myself and my ex-wife there so I can talk to the students. So if you're Puerto Rican, you're listed as Hispanic or Latino, and you're not counted as Black. You're listed as Hispanic. So that includes Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Salvadorian, and Guatemalan. So it also offers in the alternative Colombian, Honduran, Spaniard, etc. But what about the Black folk who live in Puerto Rico, and they came over there because it's a territory, just like Hawaii and Alaska used to be, and they grew up in the territorial United States, but they don't get counted except they get put in with the other
talking
group.
about went to Puerto Rico?
What's that?
What Black people went to Puerto Rico?
I'm just telling you. I have a frat brother. He is a senator from there in their internal structure. And they list him as a Latino. He can't even speak Spanish, but they listed him as a Latino. He's a homeboy. His family
he was born and raised in Alabama.
Yeah, whole family goes back to before the Civil War. They knew some of my family member from way back when. So he's counted as a Latino and not as black. You see what they're doing here? They're trying to take away our numbers because he's straight up and down, ADOS and everything else you want to deal with. But he's now classified as Hispanic or Latino.
Okay, so what are you saying, Judge? You're saying that we should not have our own separate box?
That makes sure political science, I got taught back in the 60s when this was a hot issue because it was just getting these civil rights acts and such like. One of the pitfalls is trying to propagandize the impacted people to break themselves up into smaller ethnic groups. That meant that if you only have 34 million instead of 64 million in the group, you don't get the play that you'd get with the twice the size group. So there was an encouragement by certain people who happened to be Republican at the time to get black folk to divide themselves up into subgroups. Particularly, there was a bad problem with Harlem because they had a high Puerto Rican population there. Remember the 1958-59 song, There Is a Rose in Spanish Harlem? They wanted black folk to deal with that so they could diminish what would be paid out to Harlem residents who were black and Puerto Rican. And most of them didn't care other than when you met them, they might have a Hispanic surname. So there was a thing afoot about 67, 68 within the Republican Party to get or encourage black folk in Harlem to declare that they were Puerto Rican and Hispanic rather than being Negro or black. You see, so it was very interesting what happened, and I'm seeing that again. It
All right, so
made
I
a
want to bring Devon in on it. So Devon, share your thoughts on this new OMB census classification.
So again, the judge is absolutely correct. And what we're finding, especially here in New York, as we're doing advocacy on the ground, is that is the essentially the rule of thought, right, amongst even the black politicians here in New York. They are totally against this aggregation of our group for that very reason that Judge Brown brought up. But two things can be true. And so even though there is a case that can be made that, yeah, well, as a group, there are more resources that become available based on your numbers. The issue is that every other group that falls under Black African American has a separate, distinct ethnicity that they can use to get resources in addition to anything revolving around their immigration status. And so us as Black Americans, and I use the term American freedmen, we are the only group that has never had an ethnicity in this country. We've always been categorized as race, and then they just added all these other groups on top of us under the guise of race. And so the issue with the current setup is that, yes, overall the numbers are bigger, but because we lack true representation, and there's no one fighting for our ethnic group specifically legislatively because there isn't a way to do it. Plus, as when you guys were talking about in your previous segment, just the cowardice of a lot of our people in not only in the judicial area, but also in the legislative and political arena, what you find is that even though we can get more allotted to our group based on aggregating the numbers, Black Americans have always gotten the least out of any of the coalitions that we built with anybody, regardless of melanin or not. And so I'll land on here, this OMB quote unquote decision is really not a new one. It's just a lack thereof. Nothing changed for our group. Before going into the listening sessions, the OMB categorized Black or African American as anybody with origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. And now, currently, the definition of Black African American is the same thing. Anybody that has any origins in the Black racial groups of Africa. So they did nothing for our group. But the one win that we can have out of this whole thing is that the current listening sessions were not designed to do anything for us. They were meeting specifically to do exactly what the report highlighted. They were there to push the question of race and ethnicity together, and they were there to determine what they were going to do with the MENA group, because the MENA group had been advocating for damn near 20 years to get what they got in this last listening session.
Yeah, because before the MENA had their own separate category, they were allowed to check off white. A lot of them probably didn't mind doing that because of the benefits you got as far as employment and mortgage and loans and stuff like that. However, when you build up a community where you live at, where you are homeowners, business owners, and you want to issue and you want to start gaining political power, when you talk about redistricting and resources are being allocated to where you live at, why not have your own separate box? Because for me, I look at it as gaining political power. Because now data is being collected on your group, and you can facilitate easily what you need for your group, whether it's in your community, in your city, and nationwide.
This is interesting. The change from 50 years ago is exactly the opposite. There was a movement 50 years ago to encourage Black folk who weren't looking like they just got off the boat to declare that they were other because they were mixed. Well, okay, so you got a grandmother that was mixed with, and you ain't dark, just off the boat Black, but you happen to be paper bag brown or high yellow. They want you to identify as other to diffuse you. See, the census thing is specified in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. It says the primary purpose of the census that is to be conducted every year. The primary purpose is to apportion representation in the House of Representatives. That's what the purpose is. So that is one argument about why you have all of the illegals being let in, not so they can vote, but so they can be counted without being able to vote. So California maintains or picks up a couple of extra congressmen, as would Illinois, New Jersey, and New York, instead of losing them. So when you put these sanctuary cities where they are, they get counted in as part of the population without differentiation. Now, I've filled out 6 censuses as an adult in my lifetime, and the last time in 2020 was the first of them that did not ask whether I was a citizen. Also the first that did not ask were my parents citizens, nor if they weren't natural citizens, were they naturalized and where they came from. So Trump fought that, but he got overruled. Basically, courts just said, hey, go along with it. That was when Obama's folk controlled the Supreme Court. So we never got a breakdown, and you counted people that couldn't vote, illegals, everything else in the numbers. So what had been going on, it was in the table in 2020, was California was set to lose perhaps 2 congressmen, which would have upset their far left agenda in the House of Representatives. So I remember in 1968, what was going on is 67, California was coming up with an independent census, and Ronald Reagan was running for governor in that point in time. And there was a big move afoot to get everybody to declare other if you weren't poor, straight off the boat African, pure, straight off the boat African. So it would diffuse the Black vote. And in that case, it had a great deal to do with allocation of funds from California that wasn't flat broke busted in those days. So it's what it is, but remember, there's some political consequences. So I understand the emotional appeal, but think it through, because this may be the best thing. I'm not going to have to put up with this. I'll be dead probably before the census.
I don't think it's the best thing.
But it ain't my problem, except I'm trying to give a little bit of advisement. You know, census 2030, I'm hoping to be around. 2040, I don't know, because I'll be just a little shy of 100 soon enough.
I want to bring up something.
You know,
I want to bring up something else real quick, but before I do that, I want to ask you, Devon, do you think that it's best that we stay as African Americans in how it is in the census?
No. What I would say is this, because if you look at the way it is, currently we are all Black or African American, right? And so regardless of whether we have let's say it stays this way, all the various ethnicities would still be counted as Black African American and still satisfy what Judge Joe Brown said. Now, let's say there's a separate category for those who have ancestors who was enslaved and emancipated in the United States of America. We all would still fall under this category, except we would have our own separate ethnic designation, because currently we don't have one. Because our ethnic designation is the same thing as African American, which is the same thing as all of those listed there. So let's just say we had our own ethnic designator, whatever you want to call it, whatever suits your fancy. Now what we have is an ethnic designation with which we can have data collected again for us, and then we can make cases as far as for specific policy. But more importantly, now we're talking about, which is, in my wheelhouse, the remedial justice aspect of it, reparations, where you can't have that if we're all just one big glob, because then you have what is happening in now, what they're looking to do in New York based on the legislation they passed, what's going on in Evanston and Rhode Island, like I said, where we have white people that can get reparations without an ethnic designation, without data collected specifically on our group. A lot of the specific policies that our families deserve will never be achieved. And then you have what was happening to your prior guest, because, and this is no shade to him, because this is just the language that we use. He was talking about minority businesses, because there isn't a way to talk about Black American businesses. Right? There is no legislative way to talk about that, which is why you have MWBE, minority women, I forgot what it stands for totally. I think minority women business equity or something like that. Right. But the bottom line is that's the way in which we get policy set up. And every time we have something like that, where it's a group of people that get put in together, we get the short end of that stick, because right now you have these marginalized communities, you have POC, you have BIPOC. Where you don't see any of those designations? On the census. On the census, there is a category for each one of those people. When we start talking about policy, all of a sudden there's underserved, marginalized, historically redlined, POC, and BIPOC, especially when we're talking about the left-wing side of the political equation. And so that is how we get screwed each and every time, because there's nothing specifically talking to us and about us in our body politic.
Now, let me point something out to you.
Yes, sir.
There's a form of reparations for the Japanese based on their totally unconstitutional confinement in World War II. There's a Reparations Act to the Jews. There was a Gay Reparations Act. Every one of them has a figure. It doesn't say so much per person. It's a fixed figure. Well, let's take the Gay Reparations Act. It was passed 2 weeks after that circus that they had in Congress 5 years ago on whether or not there would be a study to determine whether reparations would be feasible. They set a block amount, $58 million. It was open-ended. When they appropriated reparations for the Jews, there was a block amount of money. Now, if you divide it down to just 36 million folk that identify as ADOS instead of 64 million, they set up a block to be divided by 35 million, which is a smaller amount than what would be merited for 64 to 65 million, which is what you would get if you counted the African Americans or Black Americans the way they're stipulated now. So we could come back with the pragmatic thing, and we have to start thinking this way. How would you determine reparations? Well, it's not going to work like you are picking your gender. I have a dick, but I want to be a female, so I'm a woman. I put on a sports bra and kick all these babes in the behind when I beat up on them on a gym floor or in the arena. It doesn't work like that. You're going to have to establish where you are. And a lot of people, you can find it out if you take a DNA test, but we got this phobia about doing that and getting stuck. Somebody's trying to pull off some kind of Tuskegee experiment, whatever it may be, and somebody's doing harm. So you got a whole lot of Black folk that would just say, I am, and somebody says, no, he does too. And what about over here? We have Sally Hemings' descendants, who we know was a slave. She was a slave. Descendants of Slavery, and her master was bald hog, and he was screwing her good, and he's got all these descendants.
But what is your point? What is the
point? In other words, when you say we're going to restrict it, you start chopping the numbers down. And when they do appropriations for something like reparations, it's a smaller amount appropriated because there are fewer people to be considered. What
So
we want is a maximum number of people to be considered in making the appropriation. Then let's fight about who's supposed to be in the group.
what? That I don't understand that last
In other words, if I'm going to say, okay, there's 64 million people, let's appropriate $780 billion, which is what they did to bail out the mortgage industry under Obama. $780 billion because there's 64 million. Okay, we can fight about who's in that group later after they appropriate it. If you knock it down to 30-some million because you divide yourself up, so we don't need 700 million.
I
Let's
kind
put
of
them
get
out
what you're
200
saying.
million.
No, I get what you're saying, but that's not going to work.
No,
And
but I'm saying that's how they do politics, and that's when
right,
you
and
look
that's
at
the
this thing
problem.
called,
That's the problem because
now,
if you doing it that way, you have the deviant people that are in office or that
of
head
course,
these organizations that's not going to say, okay, now that we got this lump sum, let's X out the people who are not of the lineage.
wait. You don't
Like
do
that
that.
makes sense.
You don't do that. You don't have to specify. We talk too damn much. See, you sneak it in like everybody else does, so you get the
I don't
amount, and
reparations.
then after you get the enablement in the Appropriations Act that sets the amount, then you have the fight in court or through the regulatory agencies about who's in the group. But you got the amount. So if you get a basis for the amount that's like right now, we have approximately 64
I
million
see what you're
black
saying.
folks.
So you're saying fight for the reparations. Once you
Yeah.
get the amount, then you take it to court for who gets it.
Yeah.
The
That's what
problem with that, what I'm trying to tell you, the problem with that, the people who are heading these task force are not going to do that. That is the right thing to do, but they're not going to do that because they want everybody else to get a piece of what we're supposed to get.
that's why
Because
they
it's
want
gonna
us
get
to,
a select few more.
that may be why they want us to challenge each
So
other,
going back to the
restrict
census,
the group.
let me bring this up. Let me bring this up
Political science.
because we're talking about because it's always a problem when black people want their own damn section.
I know,
When
that's
it's, when
what
it's
we
other
do.
people, wait, because now, and thank you, Brian, who sent me this email. To comply with court, federal agency lets white people claim social disadvantage. Really?
Of course.
So it says here, wait a minute. For the second time in less than a year, a federal program for minority businesses is being retooled to serve all races, including white people, calling into question long-held standards on what it means to be socially disadvantaged amid a wave of injunctions and lawsuits. In March, a federal judge in Texas ordered the Minority Business Development Agency to open its doors to entrepreneurs from all racial, and ethnic backgrounds, ruling that its presumption that Black, Latinos, Asians, and other minorities are inherently disadvantaged violated a constitutional equal protection clause.
That's nothing new. 1972, we had meetings all over the United States involving the Black Law Student Association, the Black Student Alliance, and the National Bar Association, which was the Black Lawyers Association. In the big, huge meetings we used to have, well attended, it was developed that this was a reality. You could not do this kind of preferential treatment. It would be attacked successfully. So what we were working on is getting what are ostensibly neutral categories that would, though superficially neutral, would have a much greater impact on black folks so we could get what we wanted without having to call it black. See, this whole mess that everybody is looking at when they talk about the Supreme Court overturned affirmative action. No, they didn't. The majority opinion is exactly what we said up until 1972 when we ran into some colored folk up here at the UC Berkeley campus. They wanted to get in law school, and they said, we can't have these tests in here that make it neutral. We just want to get admitted because out of all the black folk, we have the highest scores because we are
So why do we even have a minority business
Because the theory is this: when there is a depressed people, it's not that you can't help them as long as the help is neutral and not specific to any race. It is recognized that certain categories of people get a negative impact by their situations that do have a great deal to do with the actual history of the country. But because somebody is on the bottom and downtrodden, you don't necessarily want to get them that way. What we found was very persuasive, for example, when there was reaction against the way affirmative action was, is look, man, you have, how many daughters you have? 2. I said, how old are they? Well, okay, so one of the dingbats is 19 years old. She and her homegirls are coming back from a party. It's 2:18 a.m. in the morning. They forgot to check the gas gauge. It's saying you're on empty. They say, oh my God, I got to get a gas station. And they get off the freeway. Do you want them to go to a gas station where the thugs, pimps, hoes, drug dealers, gangsters run the place? Or do you want them to go into a gas station where the leadership in the community is respectable, responsible, gainful employee?
What is the point?
So the point is, yeah, I'd like that latter one. Well, then you need to have affirmative action so the leadership in the Black communities can't get to college.
Okay, so getting back to the topic,
That is the topic.
No, well, let me, because I want to.
He asked the question.
Listen, I want to
get it. So I'm telling you, this is
that's reparations. Getting back to the topic of the census, because when you have these reports of white people now being able to claim to be a minority, right? But on the other hand, and you're saying that, yeah, it's nothing wrong with that or whatever, but you have the census where you have a group that's saying that they've been fighting for this group, for the MENA group, for the past 20 years. Now they got it. Well, if we're all supposed to be one, why are people still fighting to have their own separate group? Why? For resources.
Well, it's like this: political science, sociology, psychology suggest that when a group of people feels downtrodden, set upon, and inferior to the rest of the population, they seize on small things to try and give them self-esteem. So now if I brought in a clinical psychologist to analyze what we're talking about now, she or he would say, wow, whoopee, this is the thing that you find with a group that's downtrodden. It's like what Hitler did without saying what group he did it against, to unify the German people because they felt inferior. They'd been a nation for less than 45 years at the time that the Nazi Party came into power. So when they got this in there, what wound up happening is there was a whole lot of Germans left who were adults when the German nation was formed in 1876. And they said, oh, wow, it's not our fault. We just got our behinds beat in World War I. It's somebody else. So they wanted to get a scapegoat. They wanted just, it goes on and on.
I want to have Devon chime in because
yeah, well, I'm just giving theory. I don't have any stake in this because I'll be dead.
Well, we heard you. I want Devon. Go ahead, Devon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that input, Judge. Yeah, what I wanted to say to your first point about the specific strategy about let's include everybody, then try to whittle it down. One, including everybody will be unconstitutional, as she just read. So we can't do anything just for everybody Black. But even if we could, let's say we could do it. Let's say we could get an appropriation or a number just based on everybody Black in America. The issue is kind of going what toward Dana has said, is that the gatekeepers, the quote unquote Black gatekeepers in the political sector, are those that should not be included in any reparations package. So when it would come down to, let's say we got the number, now let's whittle it down to only those of us that had ancestors who was enslaved and emancipated in the United States of America. There are people in place that are not those people, that are Afro immigrants from various countries, that have a stake in making sure that their people groups, their demographics, their ethnicities get included on this thing. And so they are now actively stopping us in the areas of advocacy for reparations around the country, especially here in New York. There's a over index of Afro immigrants that are in place as politicians in positions of power in predominantly what's supposed to be Black American spaces or American freedmen spaces, based on what our ancestors went through and the advocacy that we've gone through in this country. And they're in control of the decisions that's made for our people. And so that's one. But two, the idea of the NWBE and affirmative action and things of that nature, All of those programs are based on the historical fact that for a time after emancipation, this government, both at the state and federal level, targeted our families and made sure to economically deprive and marginalize us and keep us out of certain opportunities wholesale. So all those programs are dedicated and kind of built on that premise to fix or address that, like LBJ said at the I think it was at Morehouse at that one of the commencement speeches. The problem is that what the Democrats have done is that they've taken our story and given everybody else the glory, is something that I say. And so they took the story of what happened to our ancestors and then just called everybody historically marginalized or underserved. The issue with that language is exactly what she just pulled up in the email and what you highlighted in the 70s. What then they say is, well, there are white people that are economically deprived. There are white people that are marginally underserved right now. They should be able to apply as well. And based on that standard, I agree with them, which is why when they shot down affirmative action, like you brought up, it wasn't saying, okay, black people shouldn't be given special privileges or shouldn't be, not even special privileges, black people shouldn't be considered to fix the harm that was done to them. That case wasn't built on that. You know as well as I do that if you read the case, it was built on the premise that diverse environments increase the possibility of a better learning environment. And so based on that premise, because there's no data that exists for that, the Supreme Court had to rule against affirmative action based on race because the premise was based on just creating a better learning environment. But in their comments, the justices said that freedmen, any policies based on freedmen, based on what was done to those families out of emancipation, Justice Kavanaugh asked the lawyer for the that was representing the Asians and that organization that was fighting against affirmative action. He asked them, would that be race-based if we decided to do some policies specifically for those individuals whose families were enslaved and emancipated in America? And they had to say no. And so that is still good law. And that is what they call remedial justice. And that is the way in which we believe reparations will become a reality, because it is race neutral, which makes it constitutionally sound, and it directly targets the people whose ancestors were enslaved and emancipated in the United States.
Let me say this. Legally, and I'm stating an opinion, not giving you legal advice, I'm just giving a legal analysis. What
Yes.
Rob wrote in his opinion is exactly what black folk, black law students in the National Bar Association decided would be what we needed back in the early 70s. Some black folk didn't like that because they got thrown in the mix. Now, let me put it to you this way. If you had language that say all persons whom by operation of law or practice suffered the following debilities under the auspices of the United States government prior to 1865, or who suffered a similar disability that presented an obstacle to the legacy acquisition of wealth, a circumstance and position as would accrue to non-discriminated against citizens, shall be entitled to reparative damages. And you go on from there. Now, that would require that you prove that you're part of that group who suffered that. That's neutral. Some white folk, by the way, were made slaves of before the Civil War.
No, they were not.
No, hold on. A lot of Irish.
They were indentured servants.
No, not indentured servants.
They were not slaves.
No. Stop. You don't know what you're
No,
doing.
I do know what I'm talking about.
No, you don't. Dana, stop.
They were indentured servants.
Dana, stop this. We're
No,
not talking
I'm
about
not.
indentured servants.
They were indentured servants.
Excuse me.
There was
We're not
slaves maybe
talking
in
about
Ireland.
Dana. We're not talking about indentured servants. Now, hold tight a second. The problem that anybody white would have with trying to establish a membership in the class is, how do you prove it? Now, if you come up with your ancestry showing that you have a lot of Irish in you, a lot of French, Spanish, English, Scottish, German, whatever it may be, you would have a hard time associating that status with being put in the position of being enslaved, either through due process of law as a punishment for a criminal offense, either through indentured servitude, which is something else that is mentioned in the First Amendment, Article 1 of the Constitution. And what happens is the only people that could effectively prove that by statistics, which the Supreme Court 55 years ago said can be used to prove important elements of a case, the only people that would be able to prove the necessary status would be what we call African Americans, Black Americans, ADOS, or whatever you want to name it. So they've got a big block to split, and when they go to claim membership, they're the only ones that can effectively get the proof by a DNA test, which when you get it analyzed, is capable of saying you came into the country somewhere about this year. This is where your African origins are. This is where you were in the United States during the period prior to the Civil War. This is your migratory passage. This is where your family went to Chicago, Detroit, Gary, Indiana, or wherever it may be, and you wound up where. So under the aegis of the U.S. Supreme Court, that kind of statistic or that kind of factual information can be used to prove status. So when you get somebody white, they are not going to have that kind of situation because they got lost in the huge numbers. Now, the Irish would probably have a better claim than anybody else because they were considered non-white until a joint resolution passed unanimously in Congress, House and Senate, in 1878 in recognition of their service on both sides during the Civil War. So they were declared white in 1878. Before that, they were considered non-white. They might have a chance. But outside of that, you got a problem with anybody else other than people that would constitute an ADOS population being able to substantiate a genetic statistical claim to compensation. So I'm just giving you some clues as to what you do and how to approach it. See, we haven't gotten anybody actually going to deal with civil rights now. It's a rare thing because there's no need. All of the laws are on the books. Back in 1965, 66, 72, I was in law school and studying the subject. It was a glaring thing in everybody's face. So it was fresh. You could talk to people that were involved and who set up the legal strategies. So I'm saying that if we work this wisely and get very dispassionate about it, we can get what we want. Now, I'm saying again,
well, what is it that
there's not going to be restitution?
No. Stop for a second. Stop for a second, because that is the problem right there. What is it that we want? You have a group of Black people over here that want something different from the majority of other Black people on the other side.
If you have the voting power, you can get what you want. If you have the...
No, you're not understanding what I'm saying.
No, I get exactly what you're saying. I'm just trying to tell you how it works.
No, it's not. Look. No, stop. Let me
all I'm saying is that sounds nice.
For a second, let me explain. I don't need an understanding of how it works. I know how it works. The problem is, in order for you to get something done and have it work for you, you have to come with a consensus, with an agenda. Black Americans is not one. We're not one sound. Am I correct, Devon? When you talk about the gatekeepers, it is a divide within Black America. So no matter what the policy, no matter what the process is, right? We can't even go through the process because we're divided amongst each other.
And listen, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually participating in brief writing, research legally, and participating in civil rights litigation, which has not occurred in 50 years. This is what worked. There has been nothing in the case law that overturns what worked. When they put extra modifications in, it stopped working. So all I'm doing is publishing for young folk what actually worked and is still legal with the laws that we have. So, you can go all you want to about what you would like to do and what's right and wrong. That's not the point. If you want something, this will work. I was famous for coming up with ways. How'd you get that? It's going to work, right? Yeah, it's not. Yes, it will. Watch, and then on appeal, it works.
Here's a solution, and we have to move on. But I want
it's a solution, and it gets you what you want.
The solution is not going to work because Black Americans are divided. That's what I'm saying.
It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, Divine. It does make a difference.
It doesn't make any difference.
I don't want to.
They want you divided. So what you do is you take a race neutral approach that is not race neutral in its impact. That way, nobody can say a damn thing. And there is no way you can attack it.
Just forget about it. Go ahead, Divine.
Go ahead. But I'm just giving the young man some advice. He's interested. He doesn't have to take it. Like I said, I'll be dead before anybody gets the damn thing. So I'm just telling you what I learned worked when I actually was helping people go into court.
Talk.
Right. Well, what I would say, judges, you are 100% absolutely correct about the race neutral. That is exactly what we are working on here in New York and amongst the reparations coalition that's building nationwide. You have to be able to craft race neutral language and race neutral policy that will withstand a constitutional challenge and when it's taken to the Supreme Court, which we know it will be. So you are correct in that way. In that way, the one thing that I'll give some pushback on is the narrative about Irish slaves. If we're talking about based on a loophole in the 13th Amendment, you are right. Then that would mean there are slaves of almost every ethnicity of anybody that gets arrested. But one thing that I do want to say for the record is that there have never been, nor will there ever be, any Irish that were chattel slaves. That did not happen in America anywhere, at no time in history. And so that is what we're talking about. We're talking about reparations for chattel slavery, where we did not have the autonomy or the power over our body to be who we are, what we wanted to do, and we were owned, and our progeny were owned thereof. That has never happened to anybody that has been classified as white before or after they were classified as white.
Exactly.
So I just want to make sure I can put that on the record.
Let me go back a little
Look
bit.
Look this up.
Hold
on.
No,
I'm not going to comment on it. Just look this up on your own.
Okay.
Look up Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake and their writings on how to model a plantation that had Negroes on it by what they learned by getting a license, a franchise to set up plantations in Ireland. Just read it.
Okay. Yeah, plantations in Ireland, not here in America.
Right, they were enslaved other places, but I'll read it. Okay, I will.
Devon,
I definitely will.
It's not a point of argument.
I'm going to ask Devon a question, please. So, Devon, talking about the race neutral, right? So
yes.
You said you was agreeing with the judge talking about race neutral, but
language.
Yes.
Right.
What is it that you're dealing with in New York? Because again, do you understand what I'm saying? Because we agreed on this before, how it's a divide amongst Black Americans.
No, I don't agree with you on that. There is no divide amongst Black Americans. What we have is a gatekeeper class that is undermining all Black people.
That's divide.
That's not a divide. We've always had that.
That's
right.
Like undermining. Al Sharpton and Fannie Mae and
wait. Let me.
Yeah.
That's a division to where when you have mute up for a second. It's just the noise. When you have a Camilla Moore in California. And they're doing these task force. Let's give an example, reparations task force. And you telling the people, yes, we're fighting for lineage-based, right? But then you add LGBTQ in it. And then you have Black people pushing back, no, we don't want them in there. And then you have Black people when it comes to the OMB, no, we don't want to be classified African Americans. We need to change it to Black Americans. But the gatekeepers are saying we're going to keep African Americans. And we're the gatekeepers because we have access to the people who are actual in power. So even though the majority of Black Americans are saying we want this or this needs to be changed for that or take this out for whether it's the reparations task force or whether it's to change the census and through the OMB, when you have Black gatekeepers, right? So-called Black gatekeepers, not 4, it's not 5, it's more than 12. They are gatekeepers in every state throughout this nation who are Black. That's what I'm talking about as far as the divide. Yes, it's kind of always been that way to a certain degree, but also when we're talking about the OMB, one of the other things was you had some Black people that wanted to be called freemen. Some wanted the ADOS. There is a divide within Black America because if it wasn't, then we would never be having these arguments with Tariq Nasheed versus Yvette Carnell. A lot of that back and forth and discourse waters down and takes away from the mission. So you can't say that there's no divide, because there is. We can't even agree on what we want to call ourselves, which, well, we are Black Americans. So until we come together as one, you don't have to agree on everything, but as one mission, like this is the cause, this is the agenda. Until we agree on one agenda, just like MENA, you had Northern Africans and the Middle Easterns. Those two sectors came together and said, we want to be different. We want to be separate from the rest of the continent of Africa. They had one agenda and they fought for it, and it took 20 years, which is about the time it takes to make stuff like that change. We are not acting that. We are not doing that. So there is a divide in Black America.
Okay, let me give you how that works. Word up, read between the lines. A gatekeeper is not the same as somebody who divides. There are 1,000 unified people trying to get through the gate, 2 people manning the gate. What you do with the 2 manning the gate is some of the 1,000 who aren't well known pay a visit and say, look, you like that drink, that Chablis or Vin Rosé or Gallo that you're drinking? It's nice, isn't it? Say, would you like to keep enjoying that? So I suggest what happens if you want to keep enjoying that, you stop what you are about right now, or you won't be by the end of next week. And see, that's the difference between then and now. I'm not telling you to go break the law, but that's just the way it worked.
I'm not disagreeing.
We had students who weren't boule, they were from the streets. There was no tuition to go to college back then, so people did not want to get a 1A classification and go see Brother Ho Chi Minh over in the Nam. They wanted that 2A, so they entered college. There was money available. That was the hustle and the ability to learn. So you paid these people a visitation. I'm not going to confess anything like that. And they just disappeared and they removed themselves from keeping the gate. See, that's like you're in New York. You've got a organization there that's known sometimes as the syndicate.
In New York.
How do they operate when the syndicates got something they want to do and somebody tries to break stuff up? You see, I'm not telling you to do anything illegal, but it is what it is, and that's how it works. You can't be nice about this, but everybody wants to be nice because they don't want to get their hands dirty and their Al Sharps and punk asses, along with Cory Booker punk asses, along with Tiffany asses, and they
let me just separate your time and now, because your time, what you just laid out, you had the students and you had these gatekeepers or whatever. There was pushing against the machine, pushing against the government, pushing against white supremacy or white people, whatever. That's not the case today. It's not. Yeah, it's not. Do you know what it is today? Let me talk. Let me talk, please. What it is today is, when I say we have a divide in Black America, I don't need to talk about white people. I don't even focus on them. Because of the fact is that if we sit up here, and I see it all on X, they argue over a name. You have people with a large following like Tariq Nasheed creating FBA. Why would you do that? So that you could take away from ADOS, which had a movement. So you had, and then you did have the Black Boule and the N-Cobras and the narcs that were trying to decimate ADOS in that movement. And then it became all these different sectors of everybody going at each other neck. This is all Black. So when I say it's a divide within Black America, I'm not talking about a divide between students and the professionals, and that agenda was to push against the government. No, I'm talking about regular Black folk, whether you are a student or whether you are a grown person with a professional, and you don't want to be called Freeman, or you don't want to be called FBA, or you have a problem with ADOS. That nonsense divide is so childish, what is going on. But yes, there is a divide amongst Black Americans, which is why we can't get our own OMB box. And then you still have to deal with the—
Why do you want that own OMB box if it defeats your purpose?
Well, I think we went over that, and I don't want to keep prolonging it.
I know, but that is the issue. See, this
You
is the
want
thing.
it because
You
of
have a philosophical problem. The young man over here is actually trying to organize New York and get something done concretely. I'm not dealing with the ideological aspect of it. That's what you deal with your propaganda to accompany your action. I'm talking about from a hard political science analysis, how you get it done. In other words, you can be like the left. They learned a lesson. What is the phrase? Quote, by any means necessary, unquote. So they lie, cheat, steal, propagandize, deceive people, and they get what they want. And we're sitting here talking about stuff that is
So let me
not going
define
to
this question
get
because
us someplace. It's consideration, but you don't have
we
to
spent
tell
way too much
folk
time.
what you're up to.
So let me ask Devon this question. Well, give your closing remarks on this, Devon, and let me ask you the question of, what is going on in New York with your organization compared to other Black organizations, and even though it's different organizations, different Black organizations, are all the Black organizations coming together pushing one agenda?
Okay, great, good. So I just wanted to address a couple of your things. But you cut me off if I'm starting to go too long. In regards to the overall comment I wanted to make to what you were saying, Dana, I think is how it really comes down to how you frame it. You're not wrong. I just don't agree with how you're framing it. To what Joe Brown was just saying, I agree with him, and the fight to me is the same as it was back in his day. The only difference is that largely after Dr. King's assassination, which you guys were talking about earlier, instead of giving us a clear and present enemy, what they did was they elevated the boule. They elevated these Black faces in high places, so that now it looks like we're not fighting against white supremacy, but white supremacy are the people that prop those Black faces up. And then what they do is they use those Black faces to say, look, they're fighting for you. And what that does is that puts you in a state of, well, let me not be as by any means necessary, as the judge just said, and let me be a little bit more politically correct, because this is my brother, this is my sister. They're doing the best they can, even when they're openly undermining us. And we've had those underminers in our community forever. Since going back to the days of Callie House in 1890, you had actual senators, that were saying, no, we don't need reparations. We don't need what she's talking about. We need education. We need, to be able to vote. So they were fighting for some of the same things that they kind of deflect with us now. And so that's just something that's just the cost of doing business, right? We got to understand that the underminers, the gatekeepers are going to be there. The divide that you see in Black, that you're saying is present in Black Americans, again, I just disagree with how that's being framed. Is there a disagreement, or is there something or some friction between Tariq Nasheed and Yvette Carnell? Yeah, but that was largely largely personal.
Wait, that was just an example.
I know, I'm gonna get to everything.
Yeah, some of
But I'm gonna get to that, but I want to highlight that one because that was largely personal and based on the actions of how those two individuals were going about their business and the way in which they decided to engage each other, and then it turned into a fallout. And now what people were saying was the beauty in that, though, is that, listen, both sides agree that we need a ethnic designator because what is on the table is not enough. Yvette Carnell and her camp decides to call it American Descendants of Slavery. Tariq decides to call it Foundational Black Americans. The bottom line is they're talking about the same people. Now, going back to what you're saying with all the different organizations, if we take a look at the civil rights era, there were multiple organizations. There were individuals that thought Dr. King was a rabble rouser. Dr. King and Martin Luther King, Dr. King and Malcolm X wasn't on the same page a lot, right? But they pushed that.
But one second. My question to you is, I know all that. My question to you is, you in New York with your organizations, right? And there are other organizations, or all the different Black organizations coming together and saying, we're going to push this one agenda as one accord.
What one agenda? The one agenda of what?
It could be, let's say, reparations.
Well,
in New York.
My organization is the only organization designed to do reparations in the state of New York. That's the issue.
What about the other organization that was supported with NCOBRA and NARC and them? They had that their own separate bill that they presented to the state on the state floor.
Right. So to that point, all the other organizations that are quote unquote Black are they together pushing one agenda? Yes. They are all together pushing the agenda of race-based politics. And so that is kept us in the bottom, but they are unified in that way. Our organization is the only one pushing back against that, letting them know that what you want, whether or not you want it for the right reasons, is up for discussion. But the bottom line is what you want is unconstitutional and will not pass. So it's a waste of time.
So start right there, because this is the point that I'm trying to make. Because that's exactly what I mean when I'm saying not on one accord. It could be for one thing. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Because the organization I used to be a part of in North called POP, People Organization for Progress.
Okay.
And every time, you have a different organizations come to the POP organizations. Hey, can you come help support and sponsor what we're doing? Vice versa. It's like, sure, you lend the numbers, you lend the hand, the petitions and stuff like that, marching or whatever. When I noticed when it came to immigration, particularly when it came to DACA, we're talking about it's mainly Latino / Hispanics or South American or whatever. They have a whole bunch of different organizations. But when it came to, we want to make sure children that are born here by parents who are not citizens get to stay and continue on with their school. You talk about DACA, this whole thing with DACA, even on a state level. You have multiple organizations, particularly Hispanic organizations, different ones, different Mexicans, it doesn't matter. They came together for that one agenda. And they had they were able to get a lot of public policies, passed to help buffer a lot of people, or particularly the children who were anchor babies. Black America is not doing that. That's what I'm saying. So I just gave an example of what was going on with the reparations bill in New York. You have your organization that you presented your bill, right? And then you have the NARC and Cobra sponsored other reparation bill. You got two bills with reparations with two kind of different ideologies going on, when it should be one army that wins the war.
That is totally unrealistic, and has never happened in the history of the world. In fact, when you talk about DACA and things, but that doesn't happen because here in New York, wait, hold on, let me finish. Because here in New York, you have Hispanic organizations that are against what's going on with the migrant crisis, and you have those that are for it. So no community is for one thing pushing in one direction. Even with MENA, there was people that were MENA that didn't want that designation, and there's people in MENA that want the designation. It took them 20 years to get what some of them want. Some of them are still upset about that. The bottom line is that hold on, let me just say this one last thing, Judge. The bottom line is that there is never going to be consensus, and you also have to factor in the point that one side, the side that's being backed by the power structure, is always going to have a benefit over the one that does not have it. And so right now, those organizations who don't have large followings but are backed by the DNC are getting their way right now. That's what we're talking about, the gatekeepers, because the community at large, the majority of Black Americans especially in New York, as we're talking to them and educating them, they don't even know that there is a push to get Caribbeans and Africans reparations for what happened to the United States of America. They just let it go because they are being told by the gatekeepers that we're fighting for Black people, and in their mind, Black people has always meant us. So they just don't. A lot of the stuff they don't know and not privy to. Go ahead, Judge. I'm sorry about that.
Let me give you a solution. In American law, there is a thing called liability. There's a thing called damages. Now, imagine a school bus. The people that get on the school bus first sit in the front. The people that come on later, as they get picked up later, go to the back, further and further to the back, all right? That school bus represents what happened with the laws of the United States, slavery, Jim Crow, and everything else. Now, let's say the bus driver reaches to answer his phone, takes his eyes off the road, and crashes into an obstruction. The kids in the front of the bus get severe injuries. Maybe one or two of them dies, several get broken legs, collarbones, really jacked up. Toward the back, maybe somebody got a bloody lip or a bruised cheek. Now, That's called damages. Everybody on that bus has a liability that accrues to them from what happened. But the people sitting in the back who got on last and were furthest removed from the point of serious damage get lesser and lesser and smaller recoveries. The people that are up front, which would represent the folk that got in on first, get bigger damages in their recovery. They get hundreds of thousands, $500,000, and somebody in the back can't prove the damages. So even though they're liable, they get $1. So what happens is this issue of who you put in the group becomes irrelevant because they would have to, if they establish liability, prove damages, which I used to have to explain this to clients. Okay, is liable. They have liability, but you didn't get hurt. You don't have a medical bill. You know, you stayed home one day, but you
Can you translate that to what we're talking about?
Yes, you get it, don't you? Listen, Dana, stop being obstinate.
No, I'm asking you to translate it.
The translation is the school bus represents the system of apartheid, segregation, and slavery. The people that got on first in the front of the bus, they got brought over on the boats. The people who came along later are moving to the back because the people took the front seats. At the very back are people who just got on the bus one stop before it had the accident. There's liability because the bus driver was at fault. Everybody benefits from the liability, but what each person recovers or each family recovers depends upon where they were in the bus and what injury they got served or suffered. So in other words, the people that endured the slavery and Jim Crow the longest get the most out of it, and the people that just got here and they can prove that they got some discrimination, they might get $10.
Thank you. That's all I'm asking you to do.
That's what I'm talking about. We have this issue that I'm trying to school people on. When you're asking for something, it's not a question of liability. It's a question of damages. You see, we are thinking that it's all or nothing. If you get in this group that's on the bus, you get the same thing wherever you're sitting on the bus. That's not, excuse me, the way American law works. You have to prove your damages. So we can get a big group, a big bus that the insurance carrier, which would be the United States government, is willing to pay a whole lot of, and it becomes a class action. So either you get an equal share or you have an opt-out on the class action where what you get depends upon how much damage you suffered. That's what we have to do. The solution's right there, but we don't have that kind of facility with the law. Even if you have a law degree, nobody thinks about it because they weren't taught to think these days. Just make money because you got the license. See,
all right. So this whole conversation went longer than I wanted.
Well,
that happens sometimes. I think it was good information.
Like it's just like it's really retrograde. It's some other things, you know, that's going on in the background, but yeah.
I charge, by the way, a client $5,000 an hour for getting the advice I just paid you free of charge, gave you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've only been doing it for a bit more than a half century. Well, a few years longer than a half century. I went to a major law school. I went through the front door, and I'll brag on myself.
Yes.
When I got in, I had the highest LSAT score.
All right, come on, Judge. You need to move on. Nobody is not questioning your resume. Nobody's not questioning your resume. Nobody's not questioning your resume. Nobody never does. Nobody can question your resume. So you don't have to spill out the resume right now. I need to. It's like we're waiting.
In other words, I'm not one of these folks on X trying to tweet and talk nonsense. I'm not giving anybody legal advice. I'm just advising as to what the law is. Right. You can run with it.
Thank you, Devon. I appreciate you coming on. Well, me and you got to do a show together.
Agreed. I just want to say one last thing to the judge. I'll say it in 20 seconds. That is definitely a way. The way you're talking about is exactly what they're proposing. The issue with that, again, like I said, is would that be judicially? That's a separate conversation as far as legislatively. And so I know legislatively that will be race-based. And so what we also say is, even though what you're saying is a worthy cause, our view is that we separate those out. So anybody that was harmed by discrimination and racism, that's a racial equity bill. That is not reparations, because reparations is solely due because of what happened from emancipation to today. So that's just two separate ways.
Let's move on. Let's move on.
I didn't say you don't separate them out. It's just do what everybody from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Eisenhower to Clinton to Obama Tang boy to Biden boy is doing. They bring people in and they get what they want. Then they talk about who gets it.
Okay, fine. You have to let the guests have the last word.
Now, you weren't with him.
Thank you, Devon. You get the last word.
Yeah, no, I just want to say I definitely understand where he's coming from. I agree with that approach. We just disagreed that should be what is done in reparations because you convolute two claims that should be separate. But I understand what he's talking about with aggregating them for appropriation to get a bigger pot, things of that nature. We just believe what however big
separate them.
I know. I got you. What I'm saying is I don't care how big or small the pot is. The pot, to a certain degree, the pot should be solely for those individuals that were enslaved and emancipated in America, so that we don't have to even deal with any other stuff before. So I would just say, yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for some of the knowledge and game that you dropped.
Honestly, Don, I think if I need a day off, I'll have you host the show with the judge.
Listen, I'm just thankful for his level of expertise. And just getting some of, like you said, that game that he's giving out for free. I am totally appreciative of that.
Because he gives too much out for free.
No. Listen, for free, you better take as much as you can get.
Everybody ain't me. Majority of people don't even pay attention, and I get tired of he gives too much out. That's why I cut him off a lot, because he gives too much, all the time, too much, and they don't deserve it. But
well, listen, I love it, and I'm thankful, and thank you for your platform as well, Dana. I just want to say, the name of our organization is the U.S. Freeman Project, so that is www.usfreemanproject.org. There you can get more information. You can sign up to join us, join our newsletter where we give more information out. We are right now. We are currently organizing on the ground around this task force, around this aggregation, and around a state level office in New York to advocate for our needs specifically. And definitely hit us up if you have any suggestions or questions. We are always looking to connect with the family here. We don't care what your ethnic designation is, whatever you choose. It could be ADOS, it could be FBA, it could be Native American, it could be American Indian. If you're looking for to fight for restorative and remedial justice for our people group, we are more than willing to work with you.
I like that. I like that.
Thank you, Judge.
I approve. And again, I may be totally wrong. I just
Judge, please, okay, thank you. All right, Devon. I'll call you.
Much respect. You're doing something.
1 second. She cut the judge off. Who done that? Nobody but me, honey, because I'm the only one that can. Because you've been talking a lot of shit in this chat, and I have not been saying anything to nobody in the chat. I'm the only one that could do it.
Yeah, well, she's kind of my play stepdaughter. Anyway.
And he's not going to say otherwise. So
no. All I'm doing is, look, I went and listened to lectures that Thurgood Marshall gave so we can learn when we wanted to apply it. I listened to H.T. Lockett's in the Memphis area, who had filed all the lawsuits, started practicing in 1951. I listened to another brother that used to represent my grandfather. When I last saw him, he was 98 years old, and he'd been practicing at that point in time, for damn near 78, 79 years old. He started practicing at the turn of the 20th century. So I listened to them, and